The ranch had always been quiet in a way that felt earned. It sat beyond the edge of planned neighborhoods and tidy sidewalks, where land still followed its own rules. Fences were not decorations. Gates were not suggestions. Every post and hinge existed because the land demanded it. The main gate stood at the end of a long gravel drive, heavy steel framed in weathered wood. It was wide enough for tractors and trucks, set back from the road just far enough to feel private but not hidden. A simple sign was bolted to the center: private property, no trespassing. Another sign below it warned of livestock. Nothing dramatic, just facts. For years, that had been enough. The road beyond the gate curved through pasture and low hills, past grazing cattle and stretches of open grass that caught the wind like waves. It led nowhere public. It ended at barns, equipment sheds, and a house that had been there long before the surrounding land was carved into housing tracts and cul-de-sacs. When construction crews first arrived years ago, the ranch owner had watched from a distance. Survey stakes went in, trees came down, streets appeared where there had once been deer trails. Then came the houses, packed close together, all matching roofs and fences meant to look rustic without actually being rural. Along with the houses came an HOA. At first, it existed as noise in the distance. Newsletters left on doorsteps, signs posted near the entrance, cars with decals rolling slowly through their streets. None of it crossed the fence line. None of it mattered. Until the gate stopped being a boundary. The first time it happened, it barely registered. Tire tracks appeared in the gravel where there should not have been any. The gate stood open when it should have been closed. The tracks led straight through, cut across the pasture edge, then disappeared back toward the paved road on the other side. The ranch owner assumed a mistake. Someone lost, someone careless. It happens sometimes when GPS fails, or when people assume every road was public. The gate was closed again. The latch checked. Life moved on. Then it happened again. This time the tracks were fresh, deep enough to show tread patterns clearly. The gate hung open in the late afternoon sun, swinging slightly in the breeze. A cow stood nearby, watching it with the same confusion the owner felt. It still felt small, annoying but manageable. A new sign went up: no through road, private ranch access only. The next week, the gate was open again. That was when the pattern became impossible to ignore. It always happened during weekday mornings and late afternoons. The tracks followed the same path every time, in one side and out the other, like the land was nothing more than a convenient cut-through. Trail cameras confirmed what the signs could not stop. A single SUV appeared again and again, clean and well-maintained, clearly not lost. It slowed just enough to unlatch the gate, rolled through without hesitation, then left it swinging behind. Sometimes the driver closed it halfway, sometimes not at all. The camera angle never caught a face clearly, but it did caught confidence. The vehicle never paused to read signs, never hesitated. It moved like it belonged there. The ranch owner started keeping a log. Dates, times, screenshots. It was not paranoia, it was preparation. Weeks passed. The behavior did not change. The ranch was not just land, it was work. Open gates meant escaped livestock, damaged fences, hours of labor to undo a stranger's convenience. Each time the gate stood open, the risk grew. A single frightened animal could cost thousands. A single accident could end far worse. A certified letter was sent to the HOA office address listed online. It explained the situation clearly. Private property, repeated trespass, video evidence available, a request to inform residents that the road was not a shortcut. No response came. Another letter followed, this one firmer, still polite, still factual. Again, silence. The next step was physical. A heavier latch was installed, a chain, a lock, keys kept on hand for ranch vehicles. It was inconvenient but necessary. That lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, the chain lay on the ground, twisted and broken. The lock was gone. The gate stood wide open. The camera footage showed the SUV stopping briefly. A figure stepped out. The chain was tested, then forced. Not with panic or fear, but with irritation. The gate opened. The vehicle passed through. The act was not reckless. It was deliberate. At that point, the issue stopped being about land and became about entitlement. The ranch owner drove to the HOA entrance that afternoon and parked near the office. The building was small, decorative, more for appearances than function. A sign listed rules about trash cans and lawn heights. Inside, the receptionist listened politely and took notes. She promised to pass the message along. There was no sense of urgency, no apology, just procedure. 2 days later, the SUV appeared again. The gate was repaired, the latch reinforced, a camera placed closer. This time the driver did not bother to stop. The gate was hit slowly but firmly, pushed open by the front bumper until the latch gave way. Metal scraped, wood cracked, the vehicle passed through without slowing. That moment changed everything. Damage was no longer incidental, it was intentional. The gate was no longer ignored, it was challenged.
The ranch owner filed a police report, trespassing, property damage, evidence submitted. The response was predictable. Without a clear license plate or a face, enforcement was limited. Documentation mattered, escalation took time. Time was something the trespasser clearly believed they owned. The ranch owner stood by the gate that evening as the sun dropped behind the hills, watching shadows stretch across the pasture. The land was quiet again, but it felt different. Not peaceful, alert. Boundaries had been tested, warnings had been ignored, politeness had failed. The problem was no longer how to ask someone to stop. It was how to make stopping unavoidable. As night settled in, the ranch owner looked at the gate one last time before heading back toward the house. The decision was forming, solid and unyielding. If signs, locks, and letters meant nothing, then something else would have to speak for the land. Something that could not be pushed aside. Something that would turn entitlement into a dead end. And when morning came, plans were already in motion.
The next morning began with the same routine the ranch owner had followed for years, but the calm that usually came with it was gone. Coffee tasted flat. The air felt heavier. Every sound carried an edge. The gate sat intact for the moment, but it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt temporary. Repairing the damage took most of the morning. Broken wood was replaced. Hinges were tightened. A thicker steel latch went on, anchored deeper into the post. It was not subtle, and it was not cheap. This was not about looks. It was about endurance. New signs followed, bigger, brighter, impossible to miss. Private ranch, no access, surveillance in use, trespassers will be prosecuted. Each sign was mounted carefully, squared and level, facing directly toward the road. There was no room left for confusion or excuses. By mid-afternoon, everything was back in place. The ranch owner stepped back, hands on hips, and studied the gate like it was an opponent. It looked solid. It looked final. The trail cameras were checked and adjusted. One angled toward the latch. Another captured the approach from the road. A third covered the pasture side. Redundancy mattered now. The first pass that day came just before sunset. The familiar SUV slowed as it approached, brake lights glowing briefly. For a moment it seemed possible that the message had landed. The vehicle idled there, nose pointed at the gate, as if considering the situation. Then it rolled forward. The driver stopped inches from the latch and stepped out. This time the camera caught more detail. A woman, posture stiff, movements sharp. Her body language radiated annoyance, not uncertainty. She looked at the signs, not to read them, but to confirm that they were still there. She tugged at the latch, hard. When it did not give, she tried again, more aggressively. The gate rattled, but held. Her shoulders tightened. She walked back to the SUV, opened the rear hatch, and pulled out a long metal bar. Not a tool for emergencies, a tool for force. The ranch owner watched the footage later that night in silence, jaw clenched. The woman wedged the bar into the latch and leaned into it with her weight. Metal groaned. Wood creaked. With a sharp snap, the latch bent just enough to release. The gate swung open. She did not look around, did not hesitate. She got back into the SUV and drove through like she had won an argument that never belonged to her. The gate was left wide open behind her. That was the moment the situation crossed into something darker. This was no longer careless trespassing. It was intentional destruction. It was a decision to override someone else's ownership because it was inconvenient to respect it. The ranch owner closed the gate again under the fading light, hands shaking with anger. The latch hung crooked, useless now. Another repair, another expense. That night emails were sent. One to the HOA board, one to the management company. Screenshots attached, video clips embedded, clear evidence, dates and times, a final demand to address the behavior immediately. By morning, replies came in. They were polished, neutral, non-committal. They thanked the ranch owner for bringing the issue to their attention. They explained that the HOA did not control individual residents' driving habits. They suggested installing stronger barriers. They reminded him to contact local law enforcement for criminal matters. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of responsibility, no promise to intervene. The subtext was obvious. This was not their problem. The ranch owner drove to the property line and stood there, looking toward the rooftops of the nearby neighborhood. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, streets designed to feel orderly, controlled, superior. Somewhere in that grid lived the woman who treated his land like a shortcut. The police report was updated with the new footage. A deputy called later that afternoon. Calm voice, professional tone, limited options. Without a clear plate or a direct confrontation, it would take time, more evidence, more incidents. The process would be slow. Slow was not acceptable. Every day the gate failed was a day livestock could wander, a day equipment could be damaged, a day someone could get hurt. That evening, the ranch owner sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and began to plan. Physical solutions were the only language being understood. Fences could be cut, gates could be forced, chains could be broken. But there were limits to what a vehicle could pass through without consequences. Concrete posts were considered, heavy ones, sunk deep into the ground, effective but permanent in a way that could complicate ranch operations. Equipment needed access, deliveries needed space. Then came the idea that would not let go, steel bollards.
short, thick, industrial, designed to stop vehicles, not slow them, used to protect buildings, storefronts, and pedestrian areas from impact. They could be installed in a line spaced precisely, wide enough for tractors and authorized vehicles with a removable center section, narrow enough to block casual pass-through traffic. One set in concrete, they did not move, they did not bend, they did not negotiate. The cost was significant, the effort was real, but the message would be unmistakable. This is not a road. The ranch owner contacted a contractor the next morning. Measurements were taken, soil tested, quotes given, permits discussed. Everything was legal, everything was allowed. It was his land. The HOA was notified in writing, not as a request, but as a courtesy. Due to ongoing trespass and damage, permanent vehicle barriers would be installed at the ranch entrance. No through access would be possible. No reply came. Installation was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, the SUV continued to appear. Each time it forced the gate open. Each time it left damage behind. Each time the footage added to a growing archive. The woman never looked worried, never acted rushed. Her confidence grew, not shrank. She had learned that no one stopped her. What she had not learned yet was that boundaries do not disappear just because someone ignores them. They harden. On the morning the contractor arrived, the ranch owner stepped by the gate and watched as the first holes were drilled into the ground. Dust rose. Steel waited nearby, cold and unforgiving. This was no longer about a shortcut. It was about ending a pattern. And once the concrete set, there would be no more arguments, no more warnings, no more second chances. The road through the ranch was about to end, whether she accepted it or not.
The sound of drilling echoed across the pasture long after the contractor's truck had parked and the equipment was unloaded. It was a sharp mechanical noise that cut through the usual quiet of the land. Each bore into the soil felt like a punctuation mark, final and deliberate. 3 steel bollards were laid out beside the gate, thick industrial cylinders with a dull gray finish. They were not decorative, they were not subtle, they were meant to stop vehicles that believed they had the right of way. The spacing was intentional, wide enough for ranch equipment when the removable center bollard was lifted out, narrow enough to block any casual pass-through attempt. There would be no squeezing through, no bumping the gate open, no testing the limits. The contractor worked efficiently. Holes were drilled deep, far deeper than most people realized was necessary. Steel cages were dropped in. Concrete followed, poured thick and heavy, filling every gap. The bollards were set plumb and level, then braced while the concrete cured. By midday, the transformation was impossible to ignore. The old gate still stood, repaired again, but it no longer carried the burden of being the only line of defense. The bollards sat just inside it, a final answer waiting patiently. Fresh signs went up, mounted directly on the bollards themselves. Private property, no vehicle access, do not enter. The ranch owner stood back and studied the setup. It did not feel aggressive, it felt proportional. After weeks of warnings and repairs, this was simply reality made visible. The contractor left in the early afternoon, leaving behind curing concrete and instructions not to remove the braces for 48 hours. The removable center bollard was locked in place for now, nothing was getting through. The ranch owner checked the cameras, adjusted angles, and waited. The first test came sooner than expected. Late afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the gravel as the familiar SUV appeared at the far end of the road. It slowed slightly, as it always did, as if preparing to perform a routine. Then it stopped. The brake light stayed on longer than usual, the vehicle idled, engine humming. From the camera footage later, the hesitation was obvious. The woman stepped out, posture stiffening as her eyes took in the steel posts. She walked forward slowly, scanning the setup, head tilting as if searching for a workaround. She reached the gate first and tested it out of habit, locked, solid. Her gaze shifted to the bollards. She paced the width, measuring distance with her steps, tried to judge angles, walked back to the SUV and pulled forward slightly, lining it up as if narrowing the gap might somehow widen it. It did not. She stepped out again and examined the signs this time, really examined them, not to read the words, but to confirm the intention behind them. This was not a suggestion. Frustration radiated from her movements. She kicked the gravel, put her hands on her hips, looked down the road toward the neighborhood, then back at the ranch entrance. She tried the latch again, even though it had nothing to do with the bollards. Old habits die hard. Nothing moved. For several minutes she stood there, caught between disbelief and anger. The convenience she had claimed without permission was gone. Finally she turned back to the SUV, slammed the door, and reversed hard. Gravel sprang as she sped away. The ranch owner watched the footage that evening with a sense of quiet relief. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Relief. For the first time in weeks, the gate stayed closed overnight. The next day passed without incident. No tire tracks, no damage. The land settled back into its rhythms. Cattle grazed undisturbed. Equipment moved without issue. But peace rarely comes with resistance. On the third day, a letter arrived in the mail. Official-looking, HOA letterhead. It expressed concern. The board had received a complaint regarding the installation of vehicle barriers near the ranch entrance. A resident claimed the barriers blocked what they believed to be a shared access route and created a safety hazard. The letter requested that the ranch owner remove or modify the bollards to allow continued access while the matter was reviewed. The ranch owner read it twice
twice, then set it down. There was no shared access. There never had been. The land records were clear. The road did not exist on any public plan. It was a private ranch drive, built long before the HOA was even an idea. The response was written carefully. Property boundaries were outlined, deeds referenced, survey maps attached. A summary of documented trespass and property damage included, complete with timestamps and still images. The message was simple. The Bollards were lawful, necessary, and permanent. The HOA replied the next day. They acknowledged receipt of the information. They stated they would review the documents. In the meantime, they asked that the ranch owner consider temporary removal of the barriers to maintain neighborly relations. Neighborly relations. The phrase sat wrong. There had been no neighborly behavior when chains were broken, no courtesy when gates were forced open, no cooperation when letters went unanswered. The ranch owner declined. That evening, the SUV appeared again. This time it did not stop at the gate. It rolled forward faster than before, as if momentum could solve the problem. The vehicle slowed only at the last moment, stopping inches from the bollards. The woman stepped out, face tight with anger. She walked up to the steel posts and struck one with her palm, then with the heel of her hand. The sound was dull, unyielding. She circled the bollards, looking for weakness. There was none. Her movements grew sharper. She returned to the SUV and opened the trunk, rummaging through it aggressively. Tools clattered. Something heavy was pulled out. A sledgehammer. The ranch owner watched the footage later with disbelief that quickly hardened into resolve. She raised the hammer and swung it against the nearest bollard. The impact rang out across the land, a metallic thud that echoed. The bollard did not move. She struck it again and again. The steel absorbed every blow without complaint. The concrete beneath it did not crack. The posts stood exactly as they had been set. Her swing slowed. Her breathing grew heavier. Sweat darkened the back of her shirt. Finally, she dropped the hammer and stood there, staring at the immovable barrier she had challenged. For a long moment, she looked small. Then she screamed, not words, just raw frustration, spilling out into the open air where no one stood to hear it. She kicked the bollard, hurting herself enough to hop back, clutching her foot. The SUV left in a fury of dust and gravel. The ranch owner saved the footage and added it to the growing file. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a pattern of entitlement colliding with reality, and the collision was far from over.
The morning after the hammer incident arrived quietly, almost deceptively so. The ranch woke the way it always had, with soft light stretching over grass and the low sounds of animals moving through routine. If not for the damaged gravel near the gate and the fresh marks on the steel bollard, it would have been easy to pretend nothing was wrong. But nothing was normal anymore. The ranch owner reviewed the footage again, slower this time. Every movement, every strike, every moment of rage captured cleanly from multiple angles. It was no longer just evidence of trespass. It was proof of intent, proof of escalation. Copies were saved in multiple places. One went directly to law enforcement. Another was attached to a detailed follow-up sent to the HOA board and their management company. The tone was calm, controlled, and factual. The content was not. The message outlined repeated trespass, forced entry, destruction of private property, and now attempted destruction of permanent safety barriers. It referenced previous notices, ignored warnings, and documented damage. It made clear that further incidents would be treated as criminal acts, not neighbor disputes. This time, the response came quickly. By mid-afternoon, an email arrived from the HOA attorney. It was longer than previous messages and carefully worded. It acknowledged the severity of the situation. It expressed concern about liability. It asked for time to investigate internally and requested that the ranch owner avoid any further modifications while the matter was under review. The ranch owner read it once and felt a familiar irritation rise. There were no further modifications planned. The problem had already been solved. The only thing under review now was whether the HOA would finally accept reality. That evening, a sheriff's deputy arrived at the ranch. He walked the gate area, examined the bollards, and reviewed the footage on site. His reaction was measured but unmistakable. This was not a civil misunderstanding. This was repeated trespass with property damage and attempted vandalism. A formal case was opened. A request was made for the SUV license plate, which was now clearly visible in the latest footage. The deputy explained the next steps. A warning could be issued. Charges were possible if behavior continued. For the first time, the situation felt like it had teeth. The next 2 days passed without incident. No SUV, no fresh tracks. The gate remained untouched. The bollards stood quiet and unchallenged. The HOA, however, grew louder. Not publicly, not yet, but internally, emails began circulating. The ranch owner was accused of being uncooperative, of creating a hostile environment, of refusing reasonable compromise. One board member suggested the bollards were excessive. Another questioned whether the ranch road had been historically accessible, despite all evidence to the contrary. The ranch owner responded only when necessary and only with documentation, surveys, deeds, photos dating back decades. The facts did not change just because they were inconvenient. On the fourth day, the tension broke. Late afternoon clouds gathered low, casting the land in muted gray. The cameras caught movement at the road again. This time, the SUV was not alone. A second vehicle followed behind it,
a compact sedan with HOA decals on the door. The two pulled up together, stopping just short of the gate. The woman exited first, arms crossed, posture rigid with restrained anger. She did not approach the Bollards this time. She stood back, letting the second car's driver take the lead. A man stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing a branded polo shirt. He walked forward carefully, eyes flicking between the signs and the steel posts. He examined the setup, took photos, and scribbled notes. He tested the gate latch, then stepped back. The woman gestured shortly toward the Bollards, clearly arguing her case. Her body language was animated, insistent. The man listened, but did not react much. He walked the width again, measuring distances, then looked down the road toward the neighborhood. Eventually, he shook his head. The ranch owner later noted the subtle shift in her stance, the way her shoulders tightened, the way her hands clenched. The man approached the camera mounted near the gate and looked directly into it. He raised his hand in a small wave, then spoke, though no audio was captured. He returned to his car. The two vehicles remained parked for several minutes longer, the woman pacing, clearly unhappy with whatever conclusion had been reached. Finally, both vehicles left. That evening, a formal notice arrived by email. The HOA had completed its review. Based on property records and evidence provided, the ranch road was confirmed as private. The HOA acknowledged that residents had no legal right of access through the ranch. However, the notice went on to say that the HOA still believed the situation could have been handled with more cooperation and less confrontation. It suggested mediation to address ongoing tensions. The ranch owner closed the email and set the phone down. Cooperation required consent. Confrontation had been forced. The next morning, the sheriff's office called again. The woman had been identified. She lived within the HOA neighborhood and had been using the ranch as a shortcut to avoid traffic during peak hours. She had been contacted and formally warned. Any further attempts to access the property would result in charges. For a brief moment, it seemed like the story might end there. But entitlement rarely fades quietly. 2 nights later, under cover of darkness, the cameras detected movement near the gate again. Not the SUV this time, footsteps. The footage showed the woman approaching on foot, flashlight in hand. She examined the Bollards closely, crouching near the base. She ran her fingers along the concrete, inspecting it like a problem that could still be solved. She pulled something from her pocket and tried to wedge it into the base of the removable Bollard lock. The tool slipped. She tried again more forcefully. Nothing gave. Her frustration was visible even in the grainy night footage. She stood up abruptly and shined the flashlight directly into the camera, as if daring it to matter. Then she left. The ranch owner forwarded the footage to the deputy before sunrise. This time there was no warning. A citation was issued. Trespass. Attempted tampering with secured property. The HOA was notified as well. The situation had moved beyond passive resistance. It had become a test of consequences, and the woman had just learned that daylight was not the only thing watching her actions. The next chapter would not be about gates or Bollards. It would be about what happens when someone who has never been told no finally hears it loud and clear.
The citation changed the tone of everything. Until that point, the woman's behavior had lived in a gray space she seemed comfortable exploiting. Complaints, emails, warnings, and paperwork were easy for her to dismiss. They felt abstract, distant, like obstacles she could argue her way around. A citation was different. It had weight. It carried her name. It followed her home. The ranch felt the shift almost immediately. The next few days passed without a single incident. No SUV, no footsteps, no fresh marks near the gate. The Bollards stood untouched, their surfaces clean except for the scuffs left behind by earlier rage. For the first time in weeks, the ranch owner slept through the night without checking camera alerts. Morning chores returned to their usual rhythm. The land breathed again. But peace did not mean resolution. Inside the neighborhood, the story was changing shape. What had once been framed as a simple shortcut dispute began spreading through HOA channels as something else entirely. Emails circulated, social media posts appeared in private groups. The narrative shifted away from trespass and toward grievance. According to the version now being shared, the ranch owner was hostile, unreasonable, unwilling to compromise. The Bollards were described as aggressive and dangerous. Some posts implied they were installed to intimidate residents. None of that was true, but truth had never been the priority. The HOA board found itself under pressure. Residents complained about longer commute times. Some blamed the board for failing to preserve access. Others demanded action against the ranch owner for disrupting what they claimed had been an informal route for years. The HOA board scheduled a special meeting. The ranch owner was invited. The invitation was framed as an opportunity to clear misunderstandings and restore harmony. It suggested a neutral discussion, a chance to move forward. The ranch owner declined. There was nothing to clarify. The facts were settled. The law was clear. Attending would only legitimize a story that had already been disproven. The refusal only fueled the fire. The woman, now facing a citation, became louder. Her posts grew more emotional. She portrayed herself as a victim of overreach, claiming she had been unfairly targeted and humiliated over something harmless.
She omitted the broken chains, the forced gate, the hammer, the nighttime tampering. Selective memory was her shield. The HOA board, sensing potential liability, shifted into damage control mode. Their attorney advised them to distance the organization from the individual behavior while also calming residents. A carefully worded notice went out to the community. It acknowledged that the ranch road was private and not an approved access route. It reminded residents to respect property boundaries. It urged everyone to remain civil. It did not mention the woman by name. That omission did not go unnoticed. Whispers started, screenshots circulated, the footage, leaked quietly by someone with access, began appearing in group chats. Short clips of the hammer strikes, still images of the SUV pushing against the gate. The tone changed again. People started asking questions. Why had she ignored signs for weeks? Why had she forced entry instead of using public roads? Why had the HOA stayed silent until law enforcement became involved? The woman's posts slowed, then stopped. The citation hearing date was set. The ranch owner did not attend. The evidence spoke without him. Video timestamps, clear angles, documented damage. The ruling was swift. The citation stood. A fine was issued. A formal no trespass order followed, explicitly barring her from the ranch property. Any future violation would escalate to arrest. She left the courthouse angry and quiet. At the HOA level, consequences followed in a different way. The board issued a private reprimand to the woman for exposing the association to legal risk. She was instructed to cease all attempts to access the ranch and to stop publicly misrepresenting the situation. She was not removed from the neighborhood, but she was isolated. Neighbors who once nodded politely now avoided eye contact. Some had livestock themselves, some owned larger properties nearby. They understood what she had risked, not just for herself, but for everyone. The shortcut was gone, so was her standing. Back at the ranch, the owner made one final adjustment. A small plaque was mounted near the Bollards, understated and professional. Private property, access by permission only, violators prosecuted. No anger, no gloating, just clarity. Weeks passed, then months. The gate remained closed. The Bollards weathered rain and sun without complaint. The cameras caught nothing but wildlife and the occasional authorized vehicle. The land returned to being what it had always been, quiet, productive, unbothered. The woman still lived nearby. Sometimes her SUV passed along the public road, visible from a distance. It never slowed near the ranch entrance again. She had learned the shape of the boundary the hard way, and while the story inside the HOA faded into a cautionary tale told in lower voices, the ranch stood as it always had, unmoved. The final chapter was not about her downfall or his victory. It was about the quiet certainty that comes when a line is drawn and held, no matter how loudly someone insists it should not exist.
Time has a way of stripping drama down to its truth. What once felt urgent and explosive slowly settled into something simpler. The ranch did not change. It did not need to. The land continued doing what it had always done, growing grass, sheltering animals, absorbing weather without complaint. The only real difference was the presence of the steel bollards, standing firm at the entrance like a sentence that had already been written and would not be revised. They blended in more than expected. Dust dulled their shine, rain left faint streaks. Birds occasionally perched on top of them, unconcerned with the meaning they carried for people. To the land, they were just another fixed thing. To the ranch owner, they were peace. The cameras stayed active, but alerts became rare. Most days passed without a single notification. When they did trigger, it was usually wildlife crossing the drive or a ranch truck returning late in the evening. The gate remained closed, the latch stayed intact. No one tested it anymore. Inside the HOA, the incident became a quiet lesson. The board updated its policies, clarifying that private property outside neighborhood boundaries was not subject to association authority. New residents received orientation materials that clearly outlined access limits. The phrase "informal shortcut" never appeared again. No one admitted fault out loud, but behavior shifted. The ranch was no longer discussed as an inconvenience. It was referred to as what it had always been: private land. The woman's role in the story faded fastest. She still lived there, still drove the same SUV, still followed the same routes everyone else did, but something fundamental had changed. The confidence that once carried her through locked gates and broken chains was gone. She had met something she could not push through. Neighbors stopped including her in conversations about HOA matters. Her name no longer surfaced in emails or complaints. When discussions about property boundaries came up, they were framed carefully, with an unspoken understanding of how far things could go before consequences arrived. She did not try again. The ranch owner never celebrated the outcome. There was no victory lap, no sense of triumph. What remained instead was certainty. The line had been drawn, challenged, and held. Looking back, the progression felt inevitable.
Warnings ignored, boundaries tested, escalation met with resistance. The pattern was familiar, not just in this case, but in countless others where entitlement mistook silence for permission. The steel bollards were not the point. They were simply the moment where reality stops negotiating. The ranch owner sometimes stood near the gate in the evenings, watching the light fade across the pasture. From that spot, the neighborhood rooftops were visible in the distance, softened by space and perspective. The two worlds existed side by side, different but not hostile. They worked best when they stayed in their lanes. There were no more letters from the HOA, no more legal notices. The file of evidence was archived and left untouched. It existed only as a reminder, not a threat. Life moved forward. New calves were born. Fences were repaired where storms had done damage, not where strangers had. The ranch remained what it had always been, a place defined by work, not by conflict. And the gate did its job. It closed behind authorized vehicles. It opened when it should. It stayed shut when it needed to. The bollards stood quiet and absolute, not aggressive, just present. They did not need to prove anything anymore. The story, when told later, lost its sharp edges. It became a lesson shared in passing, a reminder that private property is not a suggestion and patience has limits. Most people understood that instinctively. Some had to learn it the hard way. In the end, the ranch owner did not gain anything new. He did not expand his land or change his life. What he reclaimed was something far more basic: the right to be left alone. And sometimes, that is the only victory that matters.